Greetings, Earthlings. I normally talk about commanders I either like or dislike, but we're going to throw that all out the window for this video. Today, we're going to talk about commanders that are insanely hard to build around. Now, first off, we've got the Grander cycle. What am I talking about? Back in Future Sight, there were 5 monocolored cards printed with the Grander ability. And basically what it means is you have to discard a card in your hands that had the same name as the card on the field. Now in a singleton format, you can see how this would be a problem. So let's figure out how we could actually utilize these. So first off, we've got Lanessa Zephyr Mage. The reason she's in the number 1 spot, I did do these in order, is because blue has access to all the clone effects like Spark Double and Nyrenicus's Vile Duplication. It also has access to all the bounce to hand effects too. Her first ability allows you to pay mana to bounce a creature to your hand, which would be all fine and dandy if she, herself, didn't cost 4 to begin with. So if you want her to send herself to your hand, you have to pay 6 mana to do so. And that's after casting one of your clone effects. So by the time you can even pull this effect off, you will have paid 10 mana to potentially only bounce 4 things. At that rate, you might as well just play the cavalcade of other blue bounce spells. And the fact that you may only get to do this once in the game is also a downer. A card like Command Beacon or Sanctum of Eternity can get her to your hand from the command zone or the battlefield, but you still have to pay the mana to do it. Your only real way around that is running Library of Lang and something to give you repeatable card draw so you can just infinitely discard her to the top of your deck and bounce your opponent's entire field. But if said opponents have no creatures to target or they all have hexproof, then it's a dead on board ability. Because the ability specifically reads, you bounce a creature, then you do the same for everything else. You have to be able to target a creature first to be able to do all that. Overall, the ability is weak, but blue has the best way to clone and circumvent the legend rule to be able to even try to do that. Second, we've got Baru, Fist of Krosa. The reason I put him second is because his static ability is actually really good. Drop in a forest and give your field trample. When you consider cards like Ashaya and Awaken the Woods exist, along with the insane amount of ramp and green, you can make your board huge. Not to mention a card like Ancient Green Warding could double up that ability. It doesn't specifically have to be landfall, it can be any ability that's triggered by lands coming in. Like, I'd be more about building him as a commander, to be honest, and just ignore the Grander ability altogether because there's really no way to make copies in green that aren't legendary. You have Mirror the Forebears and Mirage Mirror that could do it, but then they would automatically proc the legend rule, and unless you're running Command Beacon to get him to your hand, you're kinda hard pressed. Not to mention that his Grander ability just makes you a massive token, which, okay, sure. Similar to the first one, run Library of Lang and potentially do that every turn. But green's card draw is very situational for the most part, so as a sub-theme, maybe. Not to mention that the tokens created care about how many lands you have at that moment, as opposed to some whose stats scale when you drop more lands in. Okay, real quick, I didn't actually catch this when I was originally editing the video, but I really should have put Baru first. So, overlooking that making a token ability was really stupid of me, because if you run Garruk's Uprising and you have 5 or more lands on board and you have like Library of Lang and all that stuff that I just talked about, you can do that infinitely. And then run Concordant Crossroads to give them all haste. Yeah, no, I retort everything I've said. This one should have been the number 1 on the list, and I kind of want to build it myself. Okay, that's it. And the only card that I could find in green, aside from the aforementioned lands that can throw them in your hand, is Road of Return and Campfire. I personally think Baru has the best static ability, but it's really neck and neck with Lanessa just due to blue having all the good clone abilities. Third, we got Korlash, Heir to Blackblade. He's probably the best known out of this bunch. But the reason I put Korlash third is because A, black doesn't have good clone effects at all, and B, his static ability is shit. Let's call it what it is. What if I told you that he probably has the highest synergy and combo potential of this whole list? Run Library of Lang? Hell no! That's how he gets shuffled into the deck and never seen again. 2 words. Grave
Recursion. Phyrexian Reclamation, anyone? The fact that his Grandeur ability gets you 2 swamps tapped means you'd have to run cards like Amulet of Vigor and Tiller Engine. But if you can pull it off, you can get all the swamps out of your deck. And if you're running Cryptghast or Nirkana Revenant, that's net positive mana every time. Black really only has the same access to clone effects as green, so the mirrors. But the possibilities are endless with his ability comparatively. Dread Presence can drain opponents for the swamps coming in. Tortured Existence can be an alternate return to hand spell even though it's limited by the cards in your hand, but there's a lot you can do with this. And aside from the aforementioned lands and artifact, Black has access to Netherborn Altar. Next we got Orus Samite Guardian. Okay, let's be real. Preventative effects aren't the strongest, so we're just going to ignore that altogether. White has the least access to clone effects and bounce to hand effects, so you'd be really hard pressed to build around Orus. The fact that her Grandeur ability lets you literally silence an opponent for a turn is super clutch, and if you're not a purveyor of fun, then that's right up your alley. The problem with this type of ability in White is that Grave Recursion drops them right back onto the battlefield, and it's usually only if they died. So you would have to always let Orus go to the command zone from the legend rule, to which you then have access to a grand total of 3 cards to send to your hand, unless you want to run something like Erratic Portal. But because the legend rule is technically a state-based action and can't be responded to, you have no window of opportunity to do that, unless you do it in response to targeting the creature. So by the time that ability resolves, Orus is out of there. It's a lot more niche to build around. We'll put it that way. The last one on this list, and the worst one in my opinion, is Terrox Bladewing. Okay, Red has some not terrible options for cloning. You've got Cursed Mirror, Splinter Twin, Kiki Jiki, and the like. But the biggest issue is that most Red clone effects are tokens, or abilities that either get exiled or end once the turn is done, as most of the ones on this list, but I digress. So if you're gonna act, you gotta do it now. The reason why Terrox is so bad is that it's literally just a 4/4 hasty flyer for 5. And his Grandeur ability only affects another Terrox Bladewing on the board. You still have your other cloning artifacts and lands to throw them into your hand, but as opposed to the other cards in here that can just sit there and do nothing, you have to act with the Terrox clone. So you would very much want to run Rogue's Passage or Bedlam just to get him in for the damage, and stuff to give double strike and other combat keywords. You'd basically have to Voltron a card that isn't even your commander, which is dumb to me. The problem is that combat interactions are neither here nor there in a game anymore. All it takes is a Maze of Ith type effect to just render it useless, and Red doesn't have much Grave Recursion unless it's artifact related. Next we got Fage the Untouchable. We all know Fage by now. The boogie person of commander is just the game altogether. Comes into play from anywhere other than your hand, you die. Simple. Hits another player in combat, they die. Simple. So it's not that you can't cast her, you just don't want to. The beautiful part about Black is that it has the second most access to you can't lose cards behind White, like Platinum Angel, Lich's Mastery, and Lich's Mirror. But you can also run anti-enter the battlefield cards like Torpor Orb, which as far as I know is Black's only access to that effect. But Black also has the second highest access to pseudo-unblockable abilities behind Blue, like Fear, Skulk, Intimidate, Shadow, and just outright unblockable. You might be thinking, 8 is a lot of mana to ask, isn't it? Isn't it? Black has the second highest ramping capabilities behind Green. People like to vouch for White ramp nowadays, but they mostly require that someone else ramp first. Black doesn't care. Black doesn't give a shit. Black's over here like, Kate, let's double this, then add this much, then double that, and add some more, and you're dead. A player could counter Fage or Killer or whatever, but the last thing anyone wants to do is put her in your graveyard with all the return to hand from graveyard cards in Black. Next we got Hakon Stromgald Scourge. Now he's a pain for an entirely different reason. You want to be able to cast Fage from your hand. You can't cast Hakon at all because he doesn't give a shit about what you want. Like, if you want one that you have to jump through hoops for, you quite literally have to throw him into your hand, then into your grave. As it stands, there doesn't exist a card that lets you take something from the command zone into the graveyard, and that's just a crime. But that's also not to say that you can't cheat him into play through other means like Thrawn, Temporal Gateway, or Belby's Portal. The fact that he lets you cast Knights from your grave means you might as well just dump the whole deck in there. He's definitely one of those commanders that if you can pull it off, hats off to you. Next we got Mishra, Artificer Prodigy. Finally, one that actually wants to come into the battlefield from the command zone. What makes him kind of a pain is the fact that, well, it's a singleton format, right? 2 words. Possibility Storm. The reason why these two together are dangerous is because of a fun little interaction where you cast your spell, let's say it's a Sol Ring, because commander. What Possibility Storm does is it exiles the spell while it's on the stack, so it puts Mishra's ability at the bottom. What then happens is you reveal cards from the top of your deck until you reveal another artifact and cast it, resolve it, then the exiled card goes onto the bottom of the deck. Now, Possibility Storm is resolved and Mishra can now resolve. By the time it gets back to him, the Sol Ring is back in the deck and it has the same name as the original casted card, so you can just go get it and drop it out. So by the time that's all done, you were able to cast 2 for the price of 1. Where this gets a bit tricky is if you don't have Possibility Storm out, then no, Mishra sucks. He does nothing. The great part about Grixis as a color combination is you have tutors, clone effects, and spell copying abilities, so that can get really dumb. If you've built that deck, please let me know, because I would love to see it. Next we got Tetsamok Primal Death. Poor Tetsamok. You've got all the other Elder Dinos running around being awesome, and ones like Galta and Natali getting reprints, but this boy just couldn't cut it. The problem with Tetsamok is he has to be in your hand at all times, unless you're ready to finally cast him. And because of how he works, it's really transparent and obvious where he is. Counter spells, protection spells, blank spells. There's just too many answers when you know what's to come, and Tetsamok is just an example of a card that's too predictable for its own good. There really isn't a lot to say on this one, unfortunately. Next, we got Fibblethip the Lost. This one is really funny because if you've built him as the commander, you've earned my respect. The great part about him is you can just cast him and then just target him with a spell to get him into your deck. Where this gets tricky is A, blue has no real creature tutors and lets you run Arcane Adaptation and the 2 wizard cycling cards. But even then, he needs a lot to enter from the deck. So you need lots of scry, draw, and reshuffle abilities to essentially manipulate your deck at all times. You can get around it if you can bounce him to your hand and library a Langham to the top of the deck with a loot spell, but then you would need cards like one with the Multiverse, Reality Chip, or Magus of the Future. So it's still some hoops to jump through, but I figured I don't see anyone talk about this guy, but he can be really funny to build around. And then the last one on this list is Iname as 1. Okay, take the fact that this thing costs 12 aside, because Golgari can ramp pretty good, as it has access to the 2 best colors for ramping. But once again, it's one you want to cast from your hand. It only cares about spirit cards, so you basically need to build Spirit Tribal, and you want it dying too. So your best bet is running things that put it into your hand from command, then cast it, preferably at a reduced rate with things like the Medallions and Seal of the Guild Pact. Or you ramp like a motherfucker. But then you want it to die, so you can exile and do it again. Like, in my opinion, it's definitely one of the less egregious cards in this list because you can cast it as normal, and it's in colors that can ramp well. But it's still a lot of mana by that point. Responses are usually held up and ready with the question, how much mana are you at? Which would then not trigger the second ability because it's specifically a dies trigger and just, yeah. It would be real feels bad to cast that 12 CMC behemoth to be countered by a 2-drop. Okay, that's all I've got for this list. If you got more commander ideas that are really tricky to build around or just not worth building around, I'm talking about you, Niambi, then let me know. I might do another video like this, but this type of list is very niche and very small, so I might not. This might just be a one-off thing, but let me know. Yeah, and without further ado, feel free to rap that like button and tap that subscribe button. Practice safe gameplay, and without further ado, I bid thee farewell and misfortune. Shit. I bid thee farewell and good fortune.